Right. Hi, everyone. My name's Martin. Just let me know if you can hear me, please. Even if you just type in chat. Okay, great. You can hear me. Right. So today we're going to have a lot of content to work through. I'm going to be moving quite fast, but we will have the video later on that you can watch. Like, I'd rather go through a lot of content, and you can always go and watch the video afterwards, instead of me sort of slowly only covering just a small handful of things. I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes just for a couple of people that have sort of only joining now, and then we'll jump into it. And today's session is going to be on JavaScript. We're going to be looking at some basic stuff, but then also like a bit of advanced stuff towards the end. Before I begin, I just want to let you know that us teachers, we are there for you. That's like literally what they're paying us for, is to sit and help you with whatever content you're struggling with. So please don't hesitate to come and speak to us. No question is dumb. Like, we all started at some point, and just some of us a little bit further along the line. So please don't be sharp. If you've got any problems, just come and speak to us, and I'm sure we can sort it out. If you speak to me, usually we'll do like a screen sharing session, or sometimes I'll just to record a video so that you can watch the video at a later stage. But please, like, I'd rather be helping you than you sort of just struggling and getting really frustrated with the course content. Okay, so I think that's good. Actually, let's just give it one more minute. So I hope you're all having a great week. It's almost weekend. Hi, Nanita, can you hear me? Okay. Nanita, I guess I can't really explain if you can't hear my audio. Okay, cool. Right. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at in JavaScript is, what is JavaScript? So JavaScript is a high-level programming language that was created by, I'm going to have to look at what his name is, I always forget it, Brendan Eich. I think it's Eirch, Brendan Eich. And he's an American programmer. The scary thing about JavaScript, and uh, sort of scary fact about JavaScript, is he actually only made it in 10 days. He wrote it from beginning to end basically in just 10 days. Yeah, so that's why you might find that there's sort of some weird decisions that have been made in JavaScript. So JavaScript is dynamically typed, what that means is that, like, if you were learning something like C++ and you were creating a variable, you would have to say the data type that you got in the beginning. For example, we got int for integer, and let's just say our variable would be my number, and then you'd make it to 10. So you would actually go and set my number to be of that specific data type in something like C++. In JavaScript, we don't actually deal with types. We just go, let's do a lecture. We just say our variable name, and then that can actually be 10, and then we can actually make it become a string, and a whole bunch of different things. You could actually even just make it an object after that, or let's just actually make it an array. So in other languages, typically you can't actually do this. So it'll actually be an error when you try and compile your code, but JavaScript actually lets us do that, and so it's called dynamically typed. When you use TypeScript, that's when you start introducing types into JavaScript, but we're not really going to be discussing that in this video. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at is comments. I did touch on this briefly when we did my previous session 2 weeks ago, but let's just quickly look at comments. You get two types of comments. You get single line comments, and you should be using shortcut keys for this so you can quickly code, go along with your shortcut keys. You get single line comments like this, and then you also get block comments when you select a block of code and you do a block comment. Most of the time you can use a single line comment, but the block level comment is good for blocking out large portions of code, and also when you're actually documenting your code. Oh geez, Sorry, man. Sorry, everyone. I thought I was sharing already. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. But unfortunately, in the video, there will be this beginning part. Okay, so let me just go over that again. You get single line comments. Let me just make sure that Zoom comments are coming through. Okay, so you get single line comments, and then you get block comments like this, right? And you should be using your shortcut keys to both do the single line comments and the block level comments. And as I was saying earlier, block level comments are great sort of at the top of your file, where if you want to go and sort of add text, you just got to push enter. You don't have to keep going and trying to create a new comment in there. Okay. Right, so now let's have a look at declaring variables in JavaScript. At the moment, what you probably have been taught at the beginning is to use the var keyword. This is sort of a deprecated, or it's an outdated way of doing it. When you create a variable with var, what it's going to end up doing is it's actually going to create that variable throughout, like sort of like a global scope. And that can lead to problems. And there's a couple of other things that I'm not going to be going into. But the main point is that as you move along, you will eventually only be using const and let. Okay, so let me just put a variable name in here. So what I'm doing is I'm holding my Alt key and I'm just clicking in different places to give me multi-line cursors. And I'm just going to call it my variable. Then I'm just going to have to just give it a different name so it doesn't break. Okay, so let's just have a look at what these differences are. So this one, even though if you are using it in the course now, eventually later in your JavaScript career, you're going to want to you never want to be using var. Okay, so later on, there's going to be two types of ways that you declare your variables. We can either use the const keyword, or we can use the let keyword. Okay, now the const keyword is, as the name implies, it makes it a constant variable, and that's what that means is it can't have its value changed. It's set in stone now. You can't change this anymore. So if I was to try and say my variable 2 is equal to, let's just make it another number, and I save it. Sorry, I haven't actually got server running here. So I'm just going to open up the HTML file with live server. It's the extension that we discussed. So here is now the page loaded here. Let me just inspect it. Okay, so now we can actually see the code that's running here. So the script is now running in this HTML page, and we will see whatever errors are actually coming out. So I just want to try and sort out Zoom quickly because it's hidden away any comments I'm supposed to be seeing. Sorry, just bear with me. Just making another arrangement. I've lost my window, so I'm just going to make another arrangement here. Okay, so we've got the const, and we can't actually go and reassign a value to it. It's stuck like this. Whereas if we were actually using a let keyword, so let's do let, and then if we were to try and reassign my variable 3 to anything else, and let's just console log this. Okay, so you can see here the value is now 92303. So the let is basically giving us a dynamic variable that we can just assign to anything we want as we go on, whereas the const is going to be set in stone. It's for when you want to set something and it's not allowed to change. Now there's this one thing that catches people out when it comes to const, and that is with arrays and objects. So I'm going to just take this out. I'm actually going to take all of this out, and we're going to go and create an array here. So my array. And then I'm going to go and just put a bunch of values in here. Okay. Now, people usually, when they're starting out, they think, oh, I can't actually change this value, the values in this array, because it's a const. Now, that's not actually the case. We can still go and push and pop and pull and change all kinds of values in this actual array. What we can't do is we can't assign a brand new array to this. Okay, so I can't do this. This is now going to throw an error for us. So the assignment to assignment variable, we can't do that type error. But what we can do is we can go and start adding values to an array. We'll be discussing array in detail in a moment. So now I can actually go and add a number to my actual array. So there is that difference that we can change the values that are inside here, but we can't reassign a brand new array to this variable. Okay. So what I'm going to look at next is data types, just so that we can quickly just move on from that. So in JavaScript, you've got quite a few data types. Let's just go through them quickly. You've got numbers. You can see, look how it's like sort of like a light green color. Then you've got a string, which is text. You can have sort of spaces. You can have any letters in there. So let's actually just put something, a keyword here. So const numbers is equal to that. Const string. Okay, so yeah, we've got numbers. Let me actually comment it as well. Numbers and then a string. Okay, then we're going to have Booleans. Booleans are the basics of how your computers work. Just think of it as when you're actually putting a light switch on and off. When the light switch is off, it's a 0. And then when the light switch is on, it's a 1. And that's the basics of computer, is that you put zeros and ones together. Then you can actually make a letter. And then you can combine those letters to make your programming languages or just talking and all of that. As you move along in JavaScript, you'll eventually be doing character key code at, and then you'll see there's like a number 69. So that actually just comes down to binary when it gets your computer and it tries to interpret it. So with Booleans, what we've got is we've got a true or false, which is the same as your 0 or 1. So a false is 0. This is called a Boolean false. And then Boolean true. Okay, so in programming languages, Booleans are either 0 or 1 or false or true. So this is actually the same. True is the same as 1 and false is actually the same as 0. And these are typically used as flags, like if a user's logged in, you'll have something like const is, sorry, it'll actually be a let. You'll have something like let is user logged in, and you have it as false, and then your code would be checking if it's true or not. And if it's true, then you would be able to do something when they are logged in. Right, so let's now start looking at the more cooler ones like arrays and objects. So wondering if I should actually delete all of this. Yeah. Okay, so an array is, like, it tends to catch people out. An array is actually quite a very, very basic principle. All it is it's a list of items that are separated with a comma. So if I had like a list of names here, so I'm just going to say, actually, we do a list of numbers. So number list. And then inside here, we can just put a whole bunch of different values, right? And they're separated by a comma, okay? Now, typically, usually in computer science, you can't mix your data types in an array, but in JavaScript, we don't care about that in JavaScript. So you could actually have numbers there, and then you could actually have letters here. The main thing is, though, that it's actually a list of items, okay? So let me actually make that back to value that we want. So this is actually a list of items and it's separated with a comma. That's the main thing about it. Then to access each of these items, we use an index. And our computers, they start counting at 0. They don't start counting at 1. That's why in your loops and all of that, you're going to see that we're always counting in zeros. We start counting at zeros. We don't start counting at 1. So if we start at the array and we separate it with the commas, we can count it by the index or the number that it's, we just call it an index. Okay, so you can see how this will be 0. Then the next one is going to be 1. Then it's going to be 2. Then it's going to be 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Okay, so if our console log, sorry, that's in the wrong position. So if our console log the array or number list, you can see that we've got all of our values here in the array. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've opened it up here. If you see the arrow in your code when you're console logging at you, make sure that you are clicking the arrow to open it up. And then you can see this is index 0 is 3, then it's 1, then 2, 3, etc., etc. So in our code, if we wanted to actually access one of these items, or element, as you would call it in computer science, all we have to do is go and open a square bracket, and then we add the index that we actually want to use. So if I had 5, it's then going to log this 12 over here. So if I save it and we have a look at, you can see that it's actually 12. Okay, so that's sort of the basics of the array. Arrays also come with additional methods, which we'll have a look at a bit later, where when you type in your array and you put dot, so this is in the way, you'll see how these are all different array methods. So these are things that work just for arrays. It's like built into JavaScript, and it's things that you can only do with an array. So there's map, which basically just iterates through all of them. You know, you can find things. So there's a whole bunch of cool stuff you can actually do with arrays. Maybe we can actually have more advanced look at arrays and objects in the future. Okay, so that's the basics of an array. So now let's have a look at what an object is. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up here so we can actually have a look at the comparison between the two, because your arrays and your objects are generally like two big data types where you're typically working with. Okay, so I'm going to call this my object. Okay, now the way that an object works is it uses a key value pair. So that's almost like little variables inside of your actual object. So as an example here, we can have like first name, and then you put the person's first name. So just Michael there. And you can have as many values inside of your object. Okay, so I can go and create another one. Let's call it Michael, and then, let's call the last name Scott. And I'll save it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to console log the object here, my object, and save it. Okay, so here you can see here is our object. Yeah, we've got this first name key, here's the value, and then here's the last name key, and here's the value. So that's why it's called a key value pair, is that each of these entries is a key and a value. Okay, so now how do we actually access the values in here? Similar to an array, what we can do is we use the key to get the value out of it. So if I've got an object here, I can say my object dot first name. Okay, so if I console log that, then you'll see we're actually getting Michael. Make it a little bit bigger. No, that's not going to work. So you can see I've got Michael, and if I change this to last name, I'm now going to get Scott. Okay, so we're using this key to access this value inside of this object. And you could actually also, there's another thing that you can actually do with objects that's more on the advanced side, is that if you add the square brackets like you do with an array here, is you can actually use a string to access the key. So I can actually go and put first name here, and it's accessing Michael, right? The reason why I'm showing you this is that you could go and combine a bunch of strings to access like a complex object. So you could actually use code to like loop through something and then use the index to create like a string. So like object one, key one, key two, key three, and then you can rebuild like a key name over here. That's far more advanced, but I wanted to cover it just so for the sake of completion. Okay, so then those are the sort of the main data types. There are just a couple more that we do want to look at. In JavaScript, you've got null and you've got undefined. These are typically used when sort of things aren't set. So let's just say if we were to go and create a variable const test, let's console log it. Oh, sorry, that's not going to work. This definitely wouldn't work in C++. So yeah, when I've created test and we use the let and we actually log it, it's undefined. So when a variable first starts off, it's just got no value in it unless we're actually assigning a value to it. But the reason why null and undefined becomes important is that, for example, if I wanted to see if test existed, I could have gone if test and then console log has data. And I save it, and it's not going to actually run because there's nothing inside of it. But if I go and I actually put a value in here, then it actually does have data in it. So undefined and null has got a place where we use if and all kinds of conditional checks to see if it's undefined or null. I could have done the equivalent of like this also, undefined, and then take this out, and it will have that same problem that I had earlier. So it's got data. Sorry, it's because of this check that I've got here. Okay, not playing nasty with me today. But so yeah, so it's going to move on from here. Then the last thing we've got is a function. which you'll probably have already covered. If not, it will be some point in the course. So the way you create a function is that you just got the function keyword and then the name of your function, my function. And then we can just do whatever we want inside of the function. I'm just going to just call it my function here. And then console log the function. Sorry, not. It's going to call the function. Sorry. Okay, so when you create a function, you've got the name that you've created. And then for that function to get evoked or to run it, all we do is we run the keyword, or sorry, the name of the function with the 2 brackets like this. And then that's going to go call the function. I'm going to come back to functions in a moment. We're going to talk about parameters. I just wanted to do data types at the beginning so that we can look at sort of more advanced things. Right, so I'm just going to delete this, and we're going to look at just a couple of operators. Usually, with JavaScript, you would just see normal basic sort of addition. So let's just take a... Okay, I've got a variable, it's called sum, and it's equal to 10 plus 20, right? And then I'm just going to console log 10 plus 20. Sorry. Console sum. Sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to demonstrate this. Okay, so our sum is 30, right? Now, what if we want to add 10 onto this? We can say sum is equal to sum. We could say sum is equal to itself plus 10, right? And then that's going to give us 40, right? But there is a quicker way of us doing this. What we can do, if we are always adding the same sort of the value to itself, what we can do is we can use these operators like this. Can't remember what these operators are called. Sorry, my brain's not been so sharp today. So what we can do, what this is doing is it's the equivalent of saying sum is equal to sum plus 10. And you could do this with any of the operators that you can think of. You can put minus here, you can put divide, in any of them. Okay, so there's a couple of others that I just want to sort of go over. Like these two will be super, super important. And often it almost solves coding challenges on its own. So let's look at divide first. So I'm going to say let sum is equal to 50. Actually, I'm just going to say, yeah. Okay, I'm going to say 50 divided by 10. And then console log this, and we know that that is going to be 5. Okay, let's do one that's going to round off. So I'm going to take 60 and I'm going to divide it by 40. Okay, and you're going to see that we get 1.5. Now when you're dividing, it's taking how many of those items can fit into that first number. So how many times 40 can fit into 60? Now there's another operator, and you might know it from math, called Modulo. And what it does is it takes the remainder after you've divided. So we know that 40 is going to go into 60, and then what's left after that? And that is the modulo. So try and remember this one. This one, maybe not in the NORF course, but in other program applications and all of that, this tends to be sort of life-saving, being able to get that remainder after it's actually been divided. Okay. And I think, sorry, those other ones that I was showing you are called assignment operators. These ones where it's times, equal, plus, equal, minus, equal, where it's just taking itself and using it in that equation. Okay, so let's now actually look at functions. So I'm going to just do a basic function at first, and then we're going to be looking at arrow functions afterwards. Okay, so a function, we can just call it myFN. You usually, in computer science, the FN stands for function. Okay, so we did look at this earlier. We've got this function that we've called myFN. So I'm going to console log myFN. And I have to call it there. And then over here, we're just going to return hello world. Okay, so here is our function. We've created it with the function keyword. Then here is the function's name. And then inside it, we return a value. That is why this return is why when we're actually calling this function, it's actually saying hello world. If I didn't have this return here, it's just not going to do anything. It's just returning undefined because there's nothing being returned by this function. You don't have to return things from a function. In other languages, yeah, but in JavaScript, you don't have to return something from a function. Okay, so this is the basics of a function. But as it is, yeah, it's not very helpful. we can't really use this or anything of the sort. So what we could do is make use of parameters and arguments, which are the same thing. It just depends which side you're looking at it from. So what you can do in your function between the brackets here is you can add a parameter. So I'm going to just call this parameter 1. And now let's console log this. Yeah. So we've got this parameter that's going to come into this function. But we haven't actually gone and in our function itself, we'll be calling it. We actually need to be passing a value here, which is then going to become this parameter. So let me see if I can just do this. No, it's not going to work. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually pass in a value here. And I was trying to draw a line earlier. This hello world is going to become this parameter here. It's going from here and it's becoming parameter 1. And then it's available throughout my function. Okay, so if I just take out that and a console log, you can see it's actually running hello world. This parameter has become this value hello world. Okay, so when it's over here, it's called an argument when it's on the actual function, and then when it actually goes into your function itself, then it's called a parameter. And I need to double check that, but I'm fairly certain that's correct. Okay, so that's great now, because now what it means is that we can actually reuse this function and add all different kinds of values to it and reuse this function throughout of our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to return this parameter so that now when I actually call it, it returns this value here. I'll tell you what we're actually going to do. We'll actually make this a greeting. So display greeting. Okay, there I pushed F2 to go and change the function name. And VS Code is smart enough to go throughout all of your code and change wherever display greeting is. So I didn't have to go and select it here. I'm just changing it up here and then pushing enter, and it's changing throughout our app. Okay, so now our app is actually a greeting. Let me change this to greeting, make it a message. Okay, so now the function is going to make a bit more sense. So we call the function display greeting and we pass a value into it. It becomes this message, and then we display that message. And you can have as many parameters as you want here. You can have a name. So let's just say James. So now what we can have is message and then name. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add the strings together. So now when it actually logs, it's actually saying, so I'm going to delete that one. It's saying, hello world, James. Okay, so it's combining those two in this method over here, so this function, and then it's returning that combined string. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to look at is arrow functions. Don't freak out about this. Like if you're new to JavaScript and all of that, this is a bit beyond your level, but I'm just doing it just so that other people can understand it, because there is an easy way to do a conversion to it. So you get in JavaScript ES6, they introduced arrow functions, which I believe came from PHP, but I stand to be corrected on that. I think it's called fat arrows or big arrows or something. Right, so what it creates is basically, what it allows you to do is make sort of like a shorter or more concise looking function. So I'll show you what it first looks like, and then we'll actually do a conversion. So the way you do it is you go display greeting. I'm just going to call it number 2. So that it doesn't collide with, the names don't have a collision, and we have message and we have name. So this is now the exact same function as this. Sorry, that's not in the right spot. And then we can just return those two over here. Actually, we don't even have to do that. We just go message plus. So we're running on a bit of space here. So I'll break it, I guess. So usually you can have this on one line. It's not a problem, but because I've zoomed in so much for you to be able to see it, my format is going to try and put it back on one line. So I'm just keeping it over here, but this part actually does go over here. So this is actually the exact same function as this. This is just called an arrow function. I'm just going to zoom out so you can see the two there. So you can see there's all this code, whereas over here I've basically made my code into one line. And then you would actually call that a one-liner. Right, so I'm just going to zoom out again. Yeah, so when you're first starting out, you aren't expected to know how to do arrow functions. It's something that comes with time. And later on, you will actually have to eventually start using it in certain places. So I'll go through the differences in a moment, but I first want to show you how to convert a normal function to an arrow function, which I found if you do practice converting them, you start to understand what's happening. So here is our function, and what I'm going to do now is, okay, so we're going to do the conversion. So the first thing we do is we just take out the function keyword and we make it a const. Then after the function name, we put an equal, and then at the end, you put your arrow, and that's it. It's done. So now it's actually an arrow function version of this. So let me just go over that one more time. So in the beginning, you change the keyword from function to const, so now it's actually a variable. And then after display, you actually want an equal, and then over here, you have your arrow. And now it's actually the same. So let's actually just talk about the two things that matter with arrows, arrow functions. The first thing is that it's got an implicit return. Now that's just confusing programming talk. What that means is that it's got a built-in return. You don't have to write return in an arrow function. So I can actually take this out and just have it like that, and it's going to work. You don't have to type return. Whereas for a normal function, you have to type the return keyword. So an arrow function has got an implicit return, which is, to me, I don't like those fancy terms. It just means that there's a built-in return that automatically happens for you. You don't have to do it. Okay, that's the one thing. Then the other thing, and this is going to probably be a little bit sort of advanced at this stage, is that this. In a function like this, you can console, you get a this, right? And this is going to probably default to the global or the, sorry, let me get rid of that. And then, oh, there's nothing there. So, but anyways, so when you got an arrow function, there is no this that can actually get scoped to it. So what happens is if there is a this, it's going to get, it's going to reference to its parent. If there's time towards the end of the session, I'll give you like a good example. Like I've got some good examples where I can actually show you where it does matter. But so those are the two main things. If you get asked an interview question, you know, what are the two differences, or what are the differences about an arrow function? It's that it always returns on its own. You don't need to add a return, and it doesn't bind this. It binds this to the parent. Okay. Right. So those are normal functions, arrow functions. Okay, so now let's just have a look at exports and imports. Once again, ES6, they've introduced a new way to handle importing and exporting files, which can actually get a bit complicated if you're using just vanilla JavaScript. It's not supported in vanilla JavaScript, so you end up having issues. So if you do try and use import, export, and it's not working, you most likely need to go to your HTML file and you need to type type is equal to module. And then the other thing is that when you import and export your files, you have to have a .js at the end of it. Like I know this catches out a lot of people, so just try and keep this at the back of your mind. But what I actually want to talk about is just the two different types of imports and exports, because it tends to catch people out. You get two types of imports. So I'll just write them over here, and then I'll do the exports at the bottom. Okay, so this is going to be something that you will be coming across in the future. These are two different types of imports and imports. The first one is called a named import, and that basically imports the default export from a file. Whereas this, when you see these brackets over here, this means, sorry, this was actually a default import. Sorry about that. Then this is actually a named import where you're only getting certain parts of a file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to it's going to show you two examples here. Okay, so this over here, you can see we're going export const people. So this is going to export people on its own. And we can have multiple versions of this. We can have people 1, we can have people 2. We can have as many as we want. But then you can also, in the same file or in its own file, is you can also have a default export. So I'm just going to make it nothing. Hopefully that's going to be fine. Okay, so when we want to import this people, what we have to do is we have no brackets and we import it just as it is. And this name over here, we can give it any name we want. It doesn't have to be people. So over here, I've called it people, but when we're importing it over here, we can give it any name that we want. And then when you've got these ones where you aren't exporting default, those will actually be imported individually like this. Like that. Sorry, I haven't actually referenced the file, so let me actually just go reference the file. So now when I actually try and import these, hopefully it's going to work, because I push Control Spacebar. There you can see there's people 1, and then you can see there's people 2, right? And it's not uncommon to combine the two together, so that you have a named import and you also have a default import. Like with React, you've often actually got it that you're actually importing the entire sort of the default import, and then you also actually got the named import. Like I know that a lot of this is what I've actually gone and said is probably you're not going to understand most of it, and that's fine. It's just more that so hopefully when you do come across this, you'll remember, oh, wait a minute, there was actually that video, and then you can possibly come back to the video at a later stage. Okay. So that's importing and exporting. What I'm going to look at now is looping, which is something that's been around from the beginning of time when it came to programming. You know, a lot of the things in programming, looping and conditional checks, that stuff that's actually been there right from the beginning. Like it actually hasn't changed. It's actually, we're still doing the exact same things. So let's have a look at how we typically loop through something. I'm going to go and just grab this data here. Okay, so I've got an array here just called people. And in that array is objects. So you can see it's an array because it's got the square brackets, right? And then inside, here's the objects that have got squiggly brackets, and then it's got the key pair values. Let me see if I can save this in a format. Okay. So what we can do is loop through this array. You know, what's the point if we've got an array if we can't actually loop through it and do different things with it? Okay, so the first way to loop through it is using a for loop. Okay, so that starts with typing for. Then inside here, we're going to have 3 fields that we complete. Okay, the first one that we're doing, let me actually write out the whole thing, and then we can discuss it. Okay, so let's look at what's actually happening here. So I thought it may be easier if I actually just write it out first. So we go and we add the for keyword. Then inside here, there's 3 fields that are important. And you actually don't have to include all of them, but typically you do. Okay, the first one is our actual variable that's going to keep track of where we are in the loop. The way that it usually works with a for loop is that you declare a variable here at the beginning, and then this code inside here is going to run as many times as you've actually given it. And the way that it's going to keep track of that is with this variable that we very first define over here. Okay, so we've got in, we said I is equal to 0. Let me actually change this to index. Hopefully I can do it like that. Yeah. Yeah. So now I've actually, sorry, let me call it index. The I actually stands for index. So we start here by going and defining what our index is, and you usually start at 0, right? Because remember in programming we start, it's called zero-based indexing. We start counting at 0. So like in this array, it starts at 0. So when we actually creating our for loop, we actually want to start at 0 as well. Otherwise, things are just not going to work properly, like work nicely together. Okay. So the first part is where it's going to start. The next part in the for loop, that is going to be the constraint or where it actually runs until. Let's actually make it a hard-coded value. Let's make it 10. So what's going to happen here is let's do this. So that was the same thing, but this is just going to make a bit more sense. Okay, so what happens is that the loop starts at an index of 0, and now it's going to add 1 each time until it gets to this point. When it gets to this point, it's done. This code is finished. It's not going to run anymore. Okay, so that's what this part is for. This is constraining how many times it's going to run, or where does it actually run until. And then the last thing over here is how often, how much must this value increment? Must it be just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or do you actually want to go 0, 2, 4, 6, 8? So for example, we could actually go index plus 2. Now we're actually only getting 2 items out of here. But I think I maybe jumped the gun on that explanation. So, okay, so we've got this array that's running. Let me take that out and show you what's actually happening here. So I don't know if you can predict what's going to be for index. Remember, it starts at 0, and it's going to run until it gets to less than 10. And then we're going to console log it. So let's have a look at what runs here. So we can see it goes 0, then it runs again, it goes 1, it runs again, it goes 2, and it keeps running until it gets to 9. Because remember, it's less than equal to 10. 9 is less than 10. It's not less than equal to. If we wanted it to stop at 10, we would have an equal signs here, because then it's going to get to 10 and then it will only stop. Whereas less than, it actually starts, it stops just before it gets to 10. Okay, so we've got our loop, and you can see it's looping through and it counts up and then it stops there. And that's great and all, but now, what can we actually do with this? Well, the cool thing with this is that we can go and tell it to only stop when it gets to the end of an array. Now, one of the sort of array methods that you get, or values, is a dot length, and that is how long this array is, how many items are actually added in here. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we actually console log this, people.length, save it, then you can see it's 4. Sorry, that other stuff is running underneath it. So let me just actually draw a line here. Okay, so we can see it's 4. So what we can do with this loop is that we can actually make it stop when it gets to the end of our array. And then we can use this index to choose each of these items. Because remember, this is actually counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The same as your array, 0, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, not 4. 0, 1, 2, 3. Remember, even though it's 4 items, we start at 0, so it will actually end at 3. Okay, so let's actually start looking at these values inside here. I'm going to just rewrite this line of code here. I'm going to say console log people, and then I'm going to use that index as a number to access people. Remember earlier when we actually wanted to access that array, we would go like people 0. Now we're actually using the index from that loop to actually access that data for us. So you can see now we're actually getting Michael Scott, Dwight Schrute, Jim, Pam. Okay, so that's how you typically use a for loop. And a lot of things can basically get done with a for loop. It's super powerful. Right, so there's another way that one can write a for loop, and that is with for each. Okay, so the way that is that it's actually an array method. So you would go people.for each, and this might be like past the point of where you are in the course, and that's fine. Like don't stress about that. Just sort of showing you the stuff now so that it is actually at the back of your mind, so that eventually when you do get there, at least you've got like a good start to it. Okay, so the way that the array method works is you type for each, and then inside here is an anonymous function that runs. And our very first parameter is going to be the first item. Sorry, not the first item. It's going to be this entire element that's in the array. So let's actually go and call it element instead. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to console log element. I'm going to take that out. Okay, so here we go. We've got the exact same stuff as what we had earlier, where it's looping through the array and it's logging the element that we're looking at, or the item we were looking at. Now, earlier we actually had to go, remember, we had to go and actually use a number to access it. Whereas for each, we don't actually have to do that. We don't even have to specify where it ends. And what they call this syntactic sugar, which it just means it's like a better way. It just looks much nicer, but it still does the same thing. And now with these array methods, which I'm hoping we might be able to look at just now, very briefly, is they've got sort of like hidden secret sort of variables. So if you actually have a look at when I actually go and do the comma, okay, there we go. You can see that it's saying, yeah, these are the different sort of values that we actually get out of this anonymous function. Is that we've got, the first one is the value, and it's actually showing us what that value is going to be, that data type. Then we get an index, and then we actually get the actual original array that we're actually working with. Where you never really have to use this. It's usually just the value and then the index. Let's actually call that actually value and index, so that we're just following along what they're doing there. So let's take out value here. So, okay, so we've got the value that's coming through, and then we can also just console log the index, which usually you don't need, but it is useful in some places like React and that to know where you are throughout, like where you are in that array. Okay, so this is the same thing as doing this, exact same thing. Oops, sorry. It's just another way of doing it, and it's called Syntactic Sugar. Okay, still a lot to go. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is debugging. It is sort of an issue that we've got with students that they aren't debugging. Remember, we love to be helping students. It's sort of what we're doing. It's actually what we're passionate about. But there's a little bit of concern that students aren't learning how to debug their own code, and that's going to hurt you when it actually comes to working in the workplace or working on your own apps. Knowing how to debug applications is it's a skill that you have to learn in order to be able to code effectively. And this is not being taught you because we don't want students to come to us. Not at all. That's not the case. This is more that it's actually a skill that you need to have. So just sort of, I'm just going to go and just create a basic function here and just say add numbers. And let's just say we have value 1 and value 2. And then we console log value 1 plus value 2. Right. And say I will save it now. And then I'm actually going to call it. So I'm going to console log add numbers 10 plus 20. Okay, so now we should know that we're going to get, sorry, that's not right at all. Return. Okay, so when we add the numbers, we've got 10 and 30, and then it gets returned. Now, what will happen with some students is maybe they're just not actually getting anything out. So if I console log the function, because I can see it's undefined, so immediately that will tell me that, wait a minute, maybe something's not actually getting returned from the function, or maybe when there might be a typo in the variable, but I guess you would actually pick that up. But so the main purpose is that the main reason for me mentioning this is that use console log throughout your app. If there's a problem, you will most likely find the issue if you try and console log it. Like if you're doing an API call and then when you try and map out you try and list your items and it doesn't work, go and console log that data that you're getting so that you can see that the exact shape that you need to be following. And even as like seasoned developers, even though we write tests and all of that, you'll find a lot of them are still using console log deep inside their code at some points to see why something is going wrong. So the main point I'm trying to put across here is if something's going wrong, console log it, and you will be able to start pinpointing the issue. And if you can pinpoint it, you can fix it. Like most of the time with bugs, it's not hard to fix the bug. It's trying to find where the bug actually took place. And then with console log, you're going to actually be able to go and find that bug. We're running a bit low on time, so I'm going to have to just skip a bit of this content. So the next thing I want to look at is something that I'm always discussing with the students in almost all of the sessions that I have with them, is how to actually break down your app or just make it manageable. Often I'll discuss with them about like how do you go and you build this giant e-com store or something of the sort. Like you can be a developer that's actually been programming for 20 years and highly experienced. You still can't just go and in your mind plot out an entire application. It's just far too big. You need to break up your program into smaller steps that are digestible. And then you go and you program out those smaller steps. And then ultimately what you'll eventually land up with is your entire app. So just to go over that again is that your developers that have got tons of experience, they don't just look at a giant banking app and then just build that whole thing out. It's just not possible. They break it down into small steps and then they code out each of the individual steps. And if you do that, then combine all the steps together, you end up with your main application. And typically what people do is, let's just say that we were going to go and get cat pictures from an API and then display them to the user. So let's just actually just write this down here. So make app that displays cat pictures from database. So you would break this down into small steps. So immediately what I'll do is I'll just go and say that get data from API. generate HTML. Add cat URL picture, cat picture URL. So you break it down to these steps. Now you know I need to go and code this part, and you code that out. Then you need to generate the HTML, and you code that out, and then you go and you add the picture. So you only need to work on something that's easily manageable. But then when you actually complete all the steps, you'll actually find that you've actually bought out the app entirely. Okay, I think that's going to be it for now. I actually want to just see if there's questions, if anybody's asking any questions, but I'm first going to have to figure out how to get my Zoom back to where it is. Oliver, I don't know if you got your mic connected. Can you just tell me if there's any questions running at the moment? Oh, wait, I got it back. Right. Okay, so I don't think there's any questions. So I thought we might have a couple. Okay, so then let's do some bonus stuff here. Right, so here's a really cool one. It's a bit advanced, but I love it. It's my favorite thing at the moment. Been my favorite thing for a long time. Let's say we've got an object here. My object is equal to name, Michael, and then let's say last name, Scott. I'm sorry for being so slow when I type. The screen is so blown up on my side that it's very disorientating. Okay, so I'm just going to console log my object again so we can see it there. Now, if I was to try, actually, let's make a nested value here. I'm just calling this nested value, and then inside. So this is now an object within an object, and I'm going to say, let's just say country, and we call it USA. Okay, so now if I try and let's just first try and console log something that doesn't exist. So my object dot test. Okay, you can see that it's undefined, right? Now if I go nested value dot country, you can see that we get USA, right? Because we console logging my object dot nested value dot country. Okay. Now, what happens if we try to do city and we actually saved it? Oh, it's not the best example here. Sorry, just give me a second. It doesn't exist. So anyways, let me go back to what I was actually going to show you. Is that what you can do in JavaScript now, and it's called the optional chaining, is that you can actually go and put question marks on your variable names like this. So I should have actually prepared a failing example here, but I can't get it to fail like I'd like. Usually with API calls is where you typically see this. So now by putting this question mark here, what it's actually saying is that this might not exist, but still look for this key on this object. And then same over here, this might not exist, try and still look for it. So usually when you've actually got something like this coming through an API without the question marks, you've typically got it actually failing and your code will actually break. When you try and reference something like this and it didn't get passed through in your API. Whereas you can actually use optional chaining like this to get JavaScript to say like, okay, maybe this might exist, so try and get this value, but if it doesn't, don't break. So that's sort of like some bonus content there. I'm sorry I couldn't actually break it so that you could see the sort of exact case. And then since there is some more time, I guess what we could possibly do is talk logic operators. So I'm going to take this out and let's just talk very quickly about logical operators. You get and you get or. Okay. Now this actually is, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think this actually originates in the electricity world where you've sort of got logic gates, and the combination of them, how they work together, is where your result ends up. So it works with a basic system of and or. So this over here is and this is or. And I just want to very briefly go over this so that you are aware of how it works. If we're going to have a variable, actually let's do a check. So I'm going to say value 1. Flying blind here, so hopefully I can get a good example going here. Okay, so what this is going to be saying here is that this condition over here has to be true as well as this condition over here. So the and means that these conditions have to be true together. They have to all be true together. And then it will actually only go into the code. Then it's only going to meet the condition. They have to be together. So for example, if I had const value 1 is equal to 5 and const value 2 is equal to 10, this is not going to pass through because they are not both true. They both have to be true for it to get into this if statement. Then you've got an or, which means that either one of them have to be true. Sorry, I just got someone at the gate is disorientating me. Sorry. Okay, everyone, I'm going to have to just end it off in a moment. Okay, so over here, what you've actually got is that either one of these needs to be true, and then it will actually go into the code block. So either this has to be 10 or that has to be 10, but they don't both have to be true. Okay. Right, everyone, that's what I'm going to leave it off here. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to go and speak to me. Ask one of us teachers, and I'll go over any of this in more detail. I'm sorry I didn't have the examples prepared beforehand. It was I was winging this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's, as mentioned at the beginning, don't hesitate to come and ask us for help. That's why we're there. Right. Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone. Right, I'll see you around.